Do you know who I am? How an arrogant boss tanked an $800,000 project by firing the only person qualified to complete it. This story didn't happen to me, but I was there when my friend got the call, and he told me the whole thing. It's too good not to share. I've changed the names and details to keep things anonymous, but it's a wild one. In the UK, there's a system for protecting historic buildings called listing. When a building is listed, especially as Grade I, you can't just make changes or repairs however you like. Everything has to follow strict rules to preserve its historical significance. This story involves one such building, and the work needed was so specialized that only a handful of people in the country could handle it. My friend David is one of those rare experts. He's a craftsman who works with an ancient building technique that hasn't been widely used for centuries. It's a specialty, and he's in high demand. For this project, the main contractor, ACC Limited, was responsible for all the work, but when they needed someone with David's skills, they had no idea where to look. The architect gave them a list, and David was the only one available soon enough to meet their timeline. Everything was fine until about 5 days into the job when the owner of ACC Limited showed up on site. This guy, let's call him Mr. Big Shot, was loud, bossy, and full of himself, throwing orders around and ranting about delays and costs. David, focused on his work, tried to stay out of the chaos. At one point, Big Shot barked at a carpenter to go fetch him a coffee. The carpenter left, and when he didn't return quickly enough, Big Shot turned his attention to David. "Where's that damn chippy with my coffee?" he snapped. David replied calmly, "No idea." "Then go find him," Big Shot demanded. David, staying professional, said, "I'm here to work on the walls. I don't work for ACC Limited." This didn't sit well with Big Shot. "I don't care if you're an employee or a subcontractor. You work for me. Now go get my coffee." David wasn't having it. "First off, I don't appreciate being spoken to like that. Second, my contract is for this work only. I'm not here to run errands." That's when Big Shot really lost it. "You don't appreciate it? Who do you even work for?" "I'm self-employed," David replied. "Oh, so you're just a day laborer with a big mouth? Do you even know who I am?" "Yes," David answered. "Well, you're fired. Get off my site." "Put it in writing," David said, still calm. Big Shot, now furious, yelled, "Get out. You're fired. If you're still here in 10 minutes, I'll have you thrown out." David pulled out his phone to record Big Shot's tirade, which only made him angrier. Big Shot even grabbed David's hand to yell into the phone, screaming, "You're fired. Get out now." Without another word, David packed up his tools and left. On his way out, the site manager, Sam, saw him and joked, "Leaving early, Dave? Bloody part-timer." David replied, "Your boss fired me. Contract's over." Sam's face fell. "Wait, what? No. Let me fix this. Please, just wait." But David was already gone. Sam knew what Big Shot didn't. Only 7 people in the UK could do this kind of work, and they all had long waiting lists. David had been their only shot at meeting the schedule. By the time David got home, his phone had 12 missed calls. Sam eventually got through to him, begging him to come back. David said he'd consider it, but only under 2 conditions. He wanted to be paid for the days lost and receive an in-person apology from Big Shot. Big Shot claimed he was out of the country and couldn't apologize face-to-face. Meanwhile, ACC Limited had frantically contacted the other specialists, but David had already warned them about the situation. Not one of them agreed to take the job. As of now, ACC Limited is stuck, and David is standing firm. Sometimes arrogance costs more than you can afford. David remained firm on his terms, refusing to return to the site unless every condition was met. Full payment for lost days, an upfront payment for the full contract value, and a face-to-face apology from the overbearing boss. However, the situation took a turn when David discovered that the site manager, who had tried to smooth things over, had been blamed for the fiasco and fired by the very same arrogant boss. Upon learning this, David contacted the operations director at ACC Limited and made it clear that an apology was no longer sufficient. He had only considered resuming work out of respect for the site manager. But now, with him gone, David felt no obligation to return. The operations director apologized profusely and even offered to renegotiate the payment terms generously, but David declined. He explained that the only reason he'd entertained the idea of returning was to help the site manager, and without him, there was no point. When I asked David why he didn't demand that ACC rehire the site manager, he shook his head. He explained that the boss, Mr. Big Shot, was too petty to reinstate the manager just because a craftsman suggested it. The company would need to come to that conclusion on their own, or it would never happen. David lamented that it was tough for the manager, who was only 4 years from retirement, to find a new role at 61. Later, David updated the architect about everything that had transpired. The architect, who held significant influence in the industry, reached out to other connections and informed them of the situation. Through this effort, he managed to recommend the fired site manager to another company that was seeking someone with his expertise. That evening, the site manager called David to thank him, expressing his gratitude for setting things in motion. David downplayed his role, insisting it was the architect who made the recommendation. Still, the site manager insisted that David's actions had set the wheels turning. He even offered to send David a bottle of his favorite whiskey as a token of appreciation. David agreed on the condition that they share the bottle together, only if the site manager landed the job. Meanwhile, ACC Limited's operations director tried to salvage the situation by suggesting they bring back the site manager and renegotiate David's pay. But David remained steadfast. He explained that the timeline simply didn't work anymore. Even if he worked weekends, there wasn't enough time to complete the project before his next commitment started. They had missed their window. As for the job the site manager was hoping for, there was disappointing news. Despite meeting with the company, he didn't get hired. The reasons remain unclear, but it was a blow to everyone rooting for him. David's stance and principles stood out throughout the ordeal. Despite everything, he never exploited the company's desperation for financial gain, maintaining his integrity as a true craftsman. While it's frustrating not to see the pompous boss forced into a humbling apology, it's clear that David came out of this with his dignity intact, and that in itself feels like a win. David met with the former site manager on Sunday to discuss recent developments. Despite not being directly responsible, David seemed weighed down by the situation, clearly empathetic to the challenges the manager was facing. The manager mentioned his intention to pursue a claim for unfair dismissal against ACC Limited. Clear win-win scenario was now more complicated. Life rarely plays out as cleanly as we'd like it to. However, the news about the site manager wasn't as grim as it first seemed. David later explained that there had been a misunderstanding. The company the manager met with didn't offer him permanent employment, but they did propose an 18-month fixed-term contract on a distribution center project. It wasn't perfect, but the pay was slightly better than his role at ACC Limited. There was also potential for an extension if future projects came up. It wasn't a dream outcome, but it was a solid step forward. Meanwhile, David learned that ACC Limited had brought in a craftsman from Bulgaria to complete the project. David seemed almost amused when he told me this, noting that the Bulgarian would likely use a 19th-century method common in Sofia. While similar in appearance, this technique uses two critical materials that differ from the 17th-century English method required for historical accuracy. David decided to bide his time. His plan? Let the Bulgarian complete the work, get paid, and then raise the issue with the planning department and the client. If the wrong materials were used, the project would need to be redone, adhering strictly to conservation standards. It wasn't vindictive. David made it clear he didn't want the Bulgarian to suffer financially for ACC Limited shortcuts. But he also wouldn't stand by while a listed building was improperly restored. It's a small industry, David explained, and word spreads quickly. If the Bulgarian needed the correct materials, he would have to source them from one of 3 UK suppliers, one of which had stocked up specifically for David's initial work. By now, David would have heard if an order had been placed. As weeks passed, it became clear the Bulgarian wasn't using the correct materials. David's contacts on site confirmed the job was being rushed with standard supplies, likely to save costs. This didn't sit well with David, who has a deep respect for historical preservation. He resolved to wait until the project was officially completed before taking any action. When I called David for updates, he humored me with our usual banter. He joked about fitting himself with a body cam so I wouldn't miss any drama, followed by some lighthearted insults that only close friends can get away with. Despite his humor, I could tell he was keeping a careful eye on the situation. Fast forward, and the Bulgarian finished the job and returned home. From what David heard, Stefan was diligent, working long hours, including weekends, to minimize his expenses while in the UK. While Stefan seemed like a decent guy, his work wasn't up to the stringent standards required for such a sensitive restoration project. David, with his unwavering commitment to authenticity, prepared to inform the proper authorities. And so, the story continues to unfold, with each twist and turn adding to the drama. Through it all, David remains composed, driven by his dedication to preserving history and perhaps a touch of schadenfreude toward the arrogant boss who set this fiasco in motion. David felt a sense of relief after learning that Stefan had been paid before he raised the alarm about the improper work. He was already fairly confident that the job had not been completed correctly. His suspicions were confirmed when he contacted the 3 UK suppliers capable of providing the rare material required for this type of restoration. None of them had received an order for the site in question. While it was theoretically possible that Stefan had imported the materials from Bulgaria, no one on site had seen any evidence of such an overseas order. True to his plan, David reached out to the local planning authority, the architect, the client, and a group called Historic England. He detailed his concerns and suggested the most non-invasive methods to test the work. Then, he waited, nerves on edge, as they conducted their investigation. It only took a couple of days, but the anticipation was almost unbearable. I couldn't help but feel equally anxious, even though I had no personal stake in the matter. The first report came from the architect. The verdict? The wrong method had been used, compounded by the use of incorrect materials. Stefan had employed a 19th century Bulgarian technique, rather than the required 17th century English method. The architect was livid. According to David, it was the first time he'd ever heard the normally composed professional swear. Ignorant fucking cockwamble was how the architect described the company boss, noisy gobshite. David later asked me what a cockwamble was, and frankly, I had no clue. Suggestions are welcome. The architect wasn't the only one infuriated. The local planning officers visited the site for an inspection and found multiple issues. Not only had the restoration work been botched, but they also discovered that part of the building had been destroyed. The removed structure, seemingly unimportant at first glance, was actually a critical internal feature supporting the roof. Rather than repairing it, as required, ACC Limited had replaced it with a modern support. This was not only against the regulations, but also a criminal offense for a listed building. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Noisy Gobshite had ordered the alteration to save time and money. However, in classic fashion, he denied responsibility. Unfortunately for him, the project manager had email evidence directly contradicting his claims. The chaos intensified when, on January 19th, the client ordered all ACC staff off the site and began a thorough inspection of the work. They also initiated a bidding process to bring in a new contractor and announced their intention to sue ACC for the estimated £800,000 in damages. The local planning authority wasn't far behind. They issued a formal letter to ACC outlining the violations and notifying them of an upcoming inspection by conservation experts. If their findings confirmed damage to the historical features, the company would face legal action. Although prosecution in such cases can take a long time, the mere prospect of it was enough to send Noisy Gobshite running to his lawyers. Within an hour of the letter circulating among ACC staff, David received 3 separate calls from people within the company eager to dish out the latest updates. Despite the satisfaction of seeing justice unfold, David was deeply upset about the damage. The destroyed internal structure had stood for over 400 years, performing its function perfectly. Now it was gone, likely forever. That's 400 years of history wiped out by a jizz stain who couldn't bother to do things properly, David said, his sadness palpable. I couldn't help but wonder if Noisy Gobshite regretted not fetching his own coffee that fateful day. It's worth noting that the letter from the planning department didn't explicitly threaten prosecution. Instead, it outlined their intent to inspect the site and evaluate the damages. While prosecution was a possibility, It wasn't a certainty, and the process would likely drag on for months, if not years. David warned me not to get too carried away with spreading rumors, a habit I admit I've indulged in while recounting this saga. "You're too quick to feed the masses," he told me. "They might think you're farting rainbows now, but that'll change if you start spouting bollocks." As always, he was right, annoyingly so. In the meantime, there was good news about the original site manager who had been unfairly fired. David and I met him at the pub, along with a couple of other friends. It turns out that he's secured a new job, pending a routine fidelity insurance check, which he's sure to pass. He'll start his new role on February 9th, and even received a payoff in lieu of notice from ACC. It's not a perfect outcome, but it's a step in the right direction. As for ACC, their troubles are far from over. The local planning authority's inspection and the client's impending lawsuit could spell financial ruin. Meanwhile, David remains steadfast in his commitment to preserving the integrity of historical restoration, even as he watches this drama unfold with a mix of satisfaction and lingering sadness over what's been lost. David was relieved to learn that Stefan had already been paid before the fallout began. He was almost certain the work had been done incorrectly, but had refrained from acting prematurely. He had already confirmed that none of the 3 UK suppliers capable of providing the rare material had received an order for the site. While it was theoretically possible that Stefan had imported the material, no one on the site had seen evidence of such an order. With this in mind, David contacted the local planning authority, the client, the architect, and Historic England. He expressed his concerns and proposed a straightforward method to test the work without causing additional damage. The response was swift. Within a few days, the architect confirmed that the wrong methods and materials had been used. Stefan had applied a 19th-century Bulgarian technique instead of the required 17th-century English process. The architect, normally composed, was livid and used language David had never heard him use before. According to David, the architect referred to noisy gobshite as that ignorant fucking cockwamble. When David asked me what a cockwamble was, I admitted I had no idea, though it felt oddly fitting. The planning officers conducted their inspection next, confirming the architect's findings and uncovering an additional, more serious issue. The contractor had destroyed part of the building. The internal structure, which at first glance seemed unimportant, had been a crucial component of the roof's support system. Replacing it with a modern alternative was a severe violation of preservation laws. The decision to remove it, of course, had been made by none other than Noisy Gobshite, though he predictably denied responsibility. Unfortunately for him, the project manager had damning email evidence proving otherwise. In a desperate attempt to protect himself, Noisy Gobshite tried to persuade the project manager to delete the incriminating email. When persuasion didn't work, he resorted to threats. Instead of complying, the project manager reported the threats to the investigators, adding another layer of trouble for Noisy Gobshite. David's lawyer friend later informed him that interfering with a witness and attempting to destroy evidence are criminal offenses in their own right. Noisy Gobshite's hole was getting deeper by the day. Then came the news that sent shockwaves through the company. Noisy Gobshite had been fired. David heard this from 4 separate employees within hours, all of whom seemed eager to share the juicy news. When I asked David how the owner of a company could be fired, he reminded me that Noisy Gobshite had inherited the business from his father and uncle, but his brother and cousin also owned significant shares. Together, their combined ownership exceeded 50%, giving them the power to remove him. According to Louise, the accounts manager, Noisy Gobshite did not go quietly. His firing involved screaming, threats of violence, and ultimately being escorted off the premises. He seemed genuinely baffled that none of the employees wanted to help him. "He's living in cloud cuckoo land," Louise had said. It was a sentiment David and I wholeheartedly agreed with. The company's remaining leadership was now scrambling to salvage their reputation. They appealed to the client to let them finish the project, emphasizing that Noisy Gobshite was no longer involved. The client's inspection, however, confirmed 2 critical issues: the destruction of the internal roof structure and the botched work in the area Stefan had completed. Both were deemed unacceptable, and the client was furious. The estimated cost of repairing the damage and starting over had ballooned to hundreds of thousands of pounds. David mentioned there was additional news, something huge that he wasn't at liberty to share yet. He teased me mercilessly about it, hinting that it was life-changing for someone involved. Despite my relentless pestering, he refused to reveal any details. I promised the person I wouldn't tell anyone yet, he said, clearly relishing my frustration. Even his wife was annoyed with him for keeping the secret, though he stood firm. It's not my secret to share, he told her. Integrity aside, it seemed David was having a bit too much fun at my expense. As for the site manager, who had been unfairly dismissed, things were looking up. Although he initially planned to take Noisy Gobshite to an industrial tribunal, the severance package and a new job offer put those plans on hold. The new role, while only guaranteed for 18 months, came with a slightly higher salary and the potential for extension if additional projects materialized. The site manager, ever the pragmatist, seemed content with the outcome and even found time to indulge in a bit of holiday cheer, working on a sleigh project for charity. Meanwhile, Noisy Gobshite was facing the music. His attempts to wriggle out of accountability were unraveling, and the fallout from his decisions threatened to bankrupt the company. David, ever the professional, remained focused on his craft, but admitted to feeling a sense of justice as the saga unfolded. While the damage to the historical site couldn't be undone, there was some solace in knowing that Noisy Gobshite's reign of incompetence and arrogance was finally over. David's story involving the unfortunate business owner, nicknamed Noisy Gobshite, took an unexpectedly emotional turn after Mark, the storyteller, was injured in a severe car accident in January. While he had been keeping the internet updated on the tale, Mark's wife stepped in to share what had happened and to update readers on Mark's recovery. Tragically, what initially seemed like a hopeful road to recovery was cut short when Mark passed away suddenly due to a ruptured aorta, a complication likely caused by the car accident. Mark had been a beloved presence both in real life and in his online storytelling. Known for his sharp wit and ability to bring laughter to others, his updates about David and Noisy Gobshite had captured the attention of many. After his accident, Mark's wife shared details of his injuries, which were extensive: several broken bones, a punctured lung, damaged tendons, and temporary vision issues. Despite all this, Mark's humor and resilience shone through. His wife recalled how, even when he was covered in blood and unable to speak properly, he had her laughing within minutes. For months, Mark's readers waited patiently for an update on the story, unaware of the devastating turn events had taken. Mark's wife, overwhelmed by grief, later explained that his sudden passing had left her dazed and unable to address the online community. When she finally returned to Mark's account, she discovered hundreds of messages filled with well wishes, support, and curiosity about the story's conclusion. In her final update, Mark's wife thanked everyone who had reached out, expressing deep gratitude for the kindness shown to their family. She mentioned that donations to Macmillan Cancer Support, a charity close to their hearts, were made in honor of Mark, whose username, mostly Grundle, had become unexpectedly synonymous with an engaging tale about justice and karma in the workplace. As for the story itself, its loose ends remain untied. David, steadfast and principled, stood firm against Noisy Gobshite's antics and incompetence, and Mark's retelling immortalized their clash. However, the ultimate fallout for Noisy Gobshite and ACC remains a mystery. What does live on is Mark's legacy, a storyteller who turned a niche saga of historical building preservation into a captivating narrative, resonating far beyond its small corner of the internet. His humor, kindness, and determination to bring people together through words are remembered fondly by those lucky enough to read his posts or share a laugh with him in person. The world lost not just a great writer, but a wonderful human being. And while the conclusion of David's tale might never be written, Mark's own story has left an indelible mark on all who encountered it. David's work remains steady, unaffected by the pandemic. His niche skill set in historic building conservation ensures a constant demand. In fact, David has seen an increase in inquiries as the lockdowns prompted property owners to invest in maintenance and restoration projects they had been putting off. He's doing well professionally and personally, though the events surrounding the Noisy Gobshite saga left him deeply disappointed about the harm done to the historic building. As he put it to me, "You can't undo history, and some scars never heal. Regarding the site manager, the fixed-term contract he initially disliked turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Unlike the full-time employees who were furloughed or laid off due to COVID-19's impact, his contract guaranteed payment for its duration. While the pandemic turned the job market upside down, the security of his position allowed him to avoid financial strain. He settled into his new role and expressed gratitude for how things turned out, even if it wasn't the ideal situation he originally envisioned. Noisy Gobshite's situation, however, continues to unravel. He was forced to relinquish his stake in ACC Limited, reducing his involvement to an outside observer. The company faced mounting legal challenges, including the possibility of significant penalties for damage to the listed building. To keep the business afloat, the other shareholders made it clear that he needed to step aside. His assets were tied up in a personal liability agreement, meaning any outstanding costs the company couldn't cover would fall directly on him, even if it meant losing his personal property. Adding to his woes, investigators uncovered irregularities in ACC's financial records, leading to a separate inquiry by HMRC for potential VAT fraud. The delays in formal charges against him are due to the thorough preparations required for legal proceedings, but it seems inevitable that he will face charges eventually. Furthermore, past warnings from a 2011 incident involving minor damage to another listed building have come back to haunt him, painting a picture of repeated negligence. One of the rumors that initially seemed like another layer to the Noisy Gobshite drama, allegations of sexual harassment and assault within ACC, was partially confirmed. However, the most serious allegation, a rape in 2017, was tied to a former finance director, not Noisy Gobshite himself. Other rumors of sexual harassment against female staff by him proved unfounded, though the climate within ACC under his leadership is still under scrutiny. As for Mark's wife, her updates have been a touching blend of vulnerability and resolve. She detailed how the community surrounding Mark's story, both online and in real life, offered her solace during her darkest days. Though she lacked Mark's humor and storytelling flair, her factual updates resonated deeply with readers who admired her courage to carry on his legacy. She credited David and Mark's other close friends for helping her stay grounded, showing how tightly knit their support network has remained. Through her updates, Mark's wife emphasized the enduring impact Mark had on her life and others. Despite her pain, she continued to channel his values, including finishing what was started and spreading kindness wherever possible. Her candor about her grief and anger following Mark's tragic accident served as a poignant reminder of the human cost behind stories that, on the surface, may seem far removed from personal loss. Mark's legacy now lives on not only through the narrative he shared, but through the community of strangers he touched with his wit, generosity, and dedication to seeing justice served. His story, as told by his wife and friends, remains a testament to resilience, the pursuit of accountability, and the enduring power of connection. David, while still steady in his work, seems to be carrying a heavy emotional weight. His professional success continues. He's in high demand and still dedicated to his craft, but the loss of Mark has shaken him deeply. He carries himself as the strong and supportive figure for Mark's wife, yet his wife revealed the depth of his pain, something he has worked hard to hide. The news that he cries after visiting Mark's wife is heartbreaking, a testament to how profound their friendship was and how much Mark's absence has left a void in his life. Mark was more than a friend to David. He was a cornerstone of his emotional and social world. Mark's wife has been on a painful journey, trying to navigate life without him. She feels guilt for leaning too much on David, not realizing the toll it was taking. That guilt only adds to the heavy burden of grief she already carries. Mark was her anchor, her joy, and her strength, and his absence has made everything feel hollow and aimless. Watching their wedding video, which once brought happiness, now serves as a cruel reminder of everything she has lost. The vivid memory of Mark's speech about how much he loved her, how he couldn't stop smiling after their first date, broke her completely. She struggles to reconcile the depth of her pain with Mark's philosophy of cherishing life, knowing he would want her to find a way forward. Yet, the emptiness feels unbearable. as if the best parts of her life have already been lived. She candidly expresses feelings she daren't voice to people she knows, fearing their worry. Instead, she pours her heart out into these updates, writing with raw honesty about her pain, her love, and her longing for a life that feels whole again. She wrestles with despair, battling thoughts she knows Mark would disapprove of, yet she can't shake the yearning to be free from the hurt. In the background of her grief, the story of Noisy Gobshite unfolds like a slow-moving train wreck. Investigations into his mishandling of the listed building continue to loom over him. The financial fallout from his mistakes has forced him to divest his share of the company and put his personal assets on the line to cover liabilities. Legal charges are almost certain, with potential outcomes ranging from heavy fines to prison time. If the VAT fraud allegations prove true, it could seal his fate. The poetic justice of it all isn't lost on David, who quips about whether Noisy Gobshite will enjoy prison coffee. His humor, though darker than usual, remains one of the few ways he processes the anger and frustration of seeing such incompetence wreak havoc. Mark's wife's reflections on their anniversary encapsulate her grief. The day she had dreaded felt strangely empty, and yet it reaffirmed her belief that the happiest moments of her life are behind her. The video of their wedding, once a celebration of their love and shared future, now serves as a stark reminder of what was taken from her. She struggles with the idea that life is now just a series of empty days, her joy forever overshadowed by Mark's absence. Despite her despair, she finds a small solace in the kindness of strangers who continue to reach out to her. She encourages others to cherish their loved ones and not take a single moment for granted. Her words are a powerful reminder of how fragile life can be, how suddenly everything can change, and how important it is to hold on tightly to the people who matter most.